What happens when the life you've built comes crashing down because of a secret you didn't even know you had? For Marcus Walker, a self-made billionaire with everything to lose, that question becomes reality on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. But this isn't just a story about wealth or success, it's about choices, consequences, and the family he never knew he had. Stay tuned, because this is a tale where nothing is as it seems, and every decision changes everything. The city of New York sparkled below the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Walker's penthouse office. It was a space that screamed success, polished marble floors, sleek leather furniture, and abstract art pieces that cost more than most people made in a lifetime. But none of it mattered to Marcus right now. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against the edge of his mahogany desk as he flipped through stacks of wedding invitations. Each envelope gleamed with gold foil lettering, each card embossed with precision. Marcus smiled to himself, feeling an odd mix of pride and vindication. This wasn't just any wedding, this was his wedding, the culmination of years spent climbing to the top, proving everyone wrong, including her. His assistant, James Carter, stood nervously by the door, holding one final envelope in his hand. "James," Marcus said without looking up, his voice smooth but commanding. "What are you still doing there? I thought we were done." James hesitated, adjusting his glasses. "Sir, there's one more." Marcus finally glanced up, raising an eyebrow. "One more what?" "The last invitation," James replied, stepping forward cautiously. "For Lila James." At the mention of her name, something flickered across Marcus's face, a shadow of emotion so brief it might have been missed if you weren't paying attention. He set down his pen and held out his hand. "Give it here." James handed over the envelope, watching as Marcus examined it. Unlike the others, this one wasn't sealed yet. Marcus turned it over in his hands, running his fingers along the edges. Then he smirked, a slow, deliberate curve of his lips that sent a chill down James's spine. "She deserves front-row seats to this," Marcus muttered, almost to himself. "Let her see exactly what she lost." With a flourish, he signed off on the invitation, scrawling his signature across the bottom before slipping it into the envelope. As he slid it toward James, he added, "Make sure it gets delivered personally. No mistakes." James nodded quickly, clutching the envelope like it might explode. "Of course, Mr. Walker." As James left the room, Marcus returned to his work, though his mind lingered on the past. Lila James. Just thinking about her brought back memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Memories of laughter, arguments, promises broken under the weight of ambition. She'd walked away from him once, choosing freedom over fortune. And now? Now she'd regret it. Across town, in a cozy brownstone apartment filled with sunlight and the smell of pancakes, Lila James juggled 3 plates while trying not to burn breakfast. Her youngest, 6-year-old Sophie, sat at the kitchen table coloring furiously, while her twins, Ethan and Mia, argued over who got to use the blue syrup first. "Mom!" Ethan whined, tugging at her sleeve. "Mia took all the blue." "I did not." Mia protested, crossing her arms. "You're lying." Lila sighed, setting the plates down with exaggerated care. Okay, let's take a deep breath. How about we share the blue syrup? Or better yet, why don't we make purple together?" Sophie looked up from her coloring book, eyes wide. "Purple is my favorite." "See?" Lila grinned, ruffling Sophie's hair. Crisis averted. Just as she was about to pour coffee for herself, the doorbell rang. Frowning, she wiped her hands on her apron and headed for the front door. Who could be visiting at this hour? When she opened the door, a deliveryman stood there, holding a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Ms. Lila James?" "That's me," she said, taking the package. "Sign here, please." She scribbled her name on the clipboard and closed the door, curiosity piqued. Back in the kitchen, she unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal a gilded envelope. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw the return address, Walker Enterprises. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, pulling out the thick cardstock inside. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Mr. Marcus Walker and Ms. Amara Williams. Request the honor of your presence. At their marriage celebration, Lila froze, staring at the invitation as if it might disappear if she blinked. The room seemed to spin around her, the cheerful chatter of her children fading into the background. Marcus was getting married. To someone else. Lila sank into a chair, the invitation clutched tightly in her hands. Memories flooded back unbidden, memories of late-night conversations, stolen kisses, dreams they'd shared. They'd been young then, full of hope and possibility. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Marcus had changed. He'd always been driven, ambitious, determined to prove himself to a world that doubted him. And Lila? She'd loved him for it, for his fire, his passion, his refusal to settle. But loving him hadn't been easy. There had been fights, compromises, sacrifices. Until one day, she realized she couldn't keep giving pieces of herself away. So she'd left. And now, years later, he was sending her an invitation to his wedding. Not just any wedding, a lavish affair at the Plaza Hotel, complete with calligraphy and custom monograms. It was everything Marcus had ever wanted: wealth, status, perfection. But why send it to her? Was it meant as a taunt? A reminder of what she'd given up? Or worse, was it pity? Mom? Sophie's voice broke through her thoughts. Are you okay? Lila forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking. Ethan peered over her shoulder, reading the invitation upside down. Who's Marcus Walker? No one important, Lila said quickly, folding the card and tucking it back into the envelope. But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Marcus had been important once. Maybe he still was. Later that evening, after the kids were asleep, Lila sat alone in her studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases and jars of paintbrushes. The invitation lay on her work table, catching the light from the desk lamp. She picked it up again, tracing the embossed letters with her fingertips. Why had he done this? Why invite her to something that would only reopen old wounds? Did he want her to come? Did he expect her to show up, smiling politely, pretending everything was fine? Or maybe he wanted to prove something. To himself, or to her. Lila sighed, setting the invitation aside. Whatever his reasons, she didn't owe him anything. She'd built a life for herself, a good life. She had her art, her children, her independence. She didn't need Marcus Walker or his perfect little world. And yet, a part of her wondered what it would feel like to walk into that ballroom, to see him standing there in a tuxedo, looking every bit the man she used to love. Would he look happy? Would he even notice her in the crowd? Shaking her head, Lila stood and turned off the light. She didn't have to decide tonight. For now, she'd focus on what mattered: her family, her work, her future. But as she climbed into bed, the invitation still weighed heavily on her mind. The next morning, Lila woke up with the invitation still haunting her thoughts. She tried to shake it off as she made breakfast for the kids, but snippets of memories kept creeping in, memories of a time when Marcus Walker wasn't just a name on an expensive envelope. He had been someone real, someone who once made her laugh until her sides hurt and dream bigger than she ever thought possible. It was 5 years ago now, back when life felt simpler, or at least less complicated. Back then, Lila had been a struggling artist, working odd jobs to pay rent while chasing her passion for painting. Her studio apartment was tiny, cluttered with canvases and half-empty coffee cups, but it was hers. And Marcus had been different too. Not the polished billionaire everyone knew today, but a scrappy tech entrepreneur with big ideas and even bigger dreams. They'd met at a gallery opening where Lila's work was being showcased. Marcus had wandered in late, wearing a wrinkled suit and looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. But when he saw one of Lila's paintings, a vibrant abstract piece bursting with color, he stopped dead in his tracks. "This is incredible," he'd said, turning to her with genuine admiration in his eyes. "You're incredible." That was how it started. A whirlwind romance filled with late-night conversations about art and ambition, stolen kisses between meetings, and weekends spent exploring the city together. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Marcus believed in her talent, encouraging her to take risks she'd never dared before. And Lila? She brought light into Marcus's chaotic world, reminding him to slow down and appreciate the little things. But cracks began to form almost imperceptibly at first. Marcus's company started gaining traction, and with success came longer hours, higher stakes, and endless demands on his time. At first, Lila understood. She knew how much this meant to him, how hard he'd worked to get here. But as the months went by, she found herself spending more nights alone, waiting for him to come home, or worse, calling to cancel plans at the last minute because some deal couldn't wait. One evening, after yet another cancelled dinner date, Lila confronted him. They were sitting in his sleek new apartment, the one he'd bought without even asking her opinion, and the tension between them was palpable. "Do you remember what today is?" Lila asked, her voice quiet but firm. Marcus looked up from his laptop, distracted. It's our anniversary," she said, her tone tinged with frustration. "Or did that slip your mind along with everything else?" His expression shifted, guilt flickering across his face. "Lila, I'm sorry. There was this investor meeting, it came up out of nowhere. You know how important this could be for the company." "And what about us?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Is this company more important than me? Than us?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You know it's not like that. Success demands sacrifice, Lila. If we want to build something meaningful, we have to make tough choices. But those choices shouldn't come at the expense of the people who matter most," she exclaimed, tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't keep living like this, Marcus. I need balance. I need you." For a moment, he just stared at her, his jaw tightening. Then he shook his head. "I don't know what you want me to say. This is who I am. This is what I do. And if I can't handle it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Then maybe," he hesitated, his words cutting like a knife. "Maybe we're not meant to be." Those words replayed in Lila's mind over and over as she packed her things that night. She didn't scream or cry or beg him to change his mind. Instead, she moved quietly, methodically, folding her clothes and gathering her belongings. By the time Marcus realized what she was doing, it was too late. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice sharp with panic. "I'm leaving," she said simply, zipping up her suitcase. "No, you're not," he insisted, stepping closer. "We can figure this out, Lila. We can fix it." She turned to face him, her eyes filled with sadness but also resolve. "There's nothing to fix, Marcus. You've already made your choice. And so have I." With that, she walked out the door, leaving behind the man she loved and the life they'd built together. In the weeks that followed, Lila threw herself into her art, using it as a way to process her pain. She painted furiously, creating pieces that were raw and emotional, each stroke a reflection of her heartbreak. To her surprise, the art world took notice. Galleries began reaching out, offering her shows and commissions. Slowly but surely, she started building a career for herself, one that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. Meanwhile, Marcus threw himself into his work with equal intensity. His company skyrocketed, earning him millions and cementing his status as one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the city. But despite his outward success, there was an emptiness inside him that no amount of money could fill. Back in the present, Lila sat in her studio, staring at the invitation once again. So much had changed since that night. She'd grown stronger, more independent. She'd built a life she was proud of, surrounded by love and laughter. And Marcus? He'd become everything he'd ever wanted, powerful, wealthy, untouchable. But as she traced the edges of the gilded envelope, she couldn't help wondering if either of them had truly moved on. Was this wedding his way of proving something, to her, to himself, to the world? Or was it just another chapter in the story of Marcus Walker, the self-made billionaire who always got what he wanted? Whatever the reason, Lila knew one thing for sure: walking away from him all those years ago had been the hardest decision she'd ever made. But it was also the best one. Still, as she placed the invitation back on her desk, she couldn't shake the feeling that their story wasn't quite finished yet. Lila stared at her reflection in the mirror, her hands gripping the edge of the sink. The decision had been made: she would attend Marcus's wedding. Not because she wanted to see him or witness his perfect new life with Amara Williams, but because her children deserved answers. They deserved to know their father. It wasn't going to be easy. How do you explain something like this to three curious, precocious kids who already had so many questions about the world? Questions that always seemed to circle back to one topic they didn't fully understand: why don't we have a dad? The triplets, Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah, had asked about him more times than Lila could count. Each time, she'd brushed it off with vague responses: he's busy, or maybe someday. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth forever. And now, with the invitation sitting on her dresser like a ticking clock, there was no more room for evasion. That evening, after dinner, Lila gathered the kids in the living room. Jasmine sat cross-legged on the rug, flipping through a picture book, while Caleb and Noah wrestled over a toy car. "Hey, guys," Lila began, her voice soft but steady. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" The wrestling match paused, and all three pairs of eyes turned to her. "What is it, Mom?" Jasmine asked, tilting her head. Lila took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "You've asked me before, about your dad. About why he's not here." Caleb frowned. "Yeah. Where is he?" Noah chimed in, his tone accusatory. "Is he mad at us?" Lila's heart clenched at the question. She shook her head quickly. "No, sweetheart. He's not mad at you. It's complicated." "Complicated how?" Jasmine pressed, ever the curious one. Lila hesitated, searching for the right way to phrase it. Finally, she said, "Your dad, he's someone I used to love very much. But things changed, and we went our separate ways. That's why he hasn't been part of your lives." The room fell silent as the kids processed this information. Then Caleb spoke up, his brow furrowed. "So, does that mean we'll never meet him?" Lila swallowed hard, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Actually, she forced a small smile. "You might get the chance soon." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Lila spent hours scrolling through online boutiques, trying to find the perfect dress for the occasion. Something elegant but understated, classy but not too flashy. She settled on a navy blue gown with delicate lace detailing, a compromise between looking put together and not drawing unnecessary attention. As she tried it on in front of the mirror, she couldn't help but feel a pang of irony. Here she was, getting dressed up to watch the man she once loved marry someone else. It felt surreal, almost like stepping into a movie where she didn't belong. But beneath the surface-level absurdity, there was tension simmering inside her. What would Marcus say when he saw her? Would he even recognize her? More importantly, what would happen when he found out about the triplets? She hadn't told him. Not then, not ever. At the time, she'd convinced herself it was better that way. He'd made it clear that his career came first, and she couldn't imagine raising children in a world where they'd always come second. So she'd kept the news to herself, building a life for them without him. Now, though, she wondered if she'd made the right choice. Would he resent her for keeping such a huge secret? Or worse, would he try to take them away from her? These thoughts swirled in her mind as she styled her hair and applied makeup, each stroke of mascara feeling heavier than the last. By the time she was ready, she looked every bit the poised, confident woman she needed to be. But inside, she was anything but calm. On the morning of the wedding, Lila woke early, her stomach churning with nerves. The kids were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their mother's mind. She tiptoed around the apartment, packing a small overnight bag and double-checking the details of the venue. By mid-morning, she was helping the triplets get ready. Jasmine twirled in her floral sundress, giggling as Lila braided her hair. Caleb fidgeted in his button-up shirt, complaining that it was too fancy, while Noah refused to wear matching shoes, insisting his sneakers were way cooler. "You guys look amazing," Lila said, smiling despite the knot in her chest. "Ready to go see something special? Are we really gonna meet our dad today?" Caleb asked, his voice tinged with excitement, and maybe a little fear. Lila knelt down to his level, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll see. Either way, I want you to remember that no matter what happens, I'm always here for you. Okay?" He nodded, though his expression remained uncertain. As they piled into the car, Lila glanced at the rearview mirror, watching her children chatter animatedly about what the day might hold. She felt a surge of determination. Whatever happened next, she would protect them. She owed them that much, and herself. The Plaza Hotel loomed ahead as Lila pulled into the valet parking area. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. For a moment, she considered turning the car around, driving far away from this place and the memories it threatened to unearth. But then she heard Jasmine's voice from the back seat. "Mom, is that where the wedding is?" Lila glanced at the grand entrance, its golden doors gleaming in the sunlight. "Yes, sweetheart. That's it." Taking another deep breath, she stepped out of the car, smoothing her dress as she helped the kids climb out. As they walked toward the hotel, Lila felt a strange mix of emotions: fear, anticipation, resolve. Inside, the lobby buzzed with activity. Guests milled about, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits, sipping champagne and exchanging polite conversation. Lila spotted James Carter near the registration desk, looking just as polished as he had 5 years ago. "Ms. James," he greeted her, his tone neutral but his eyes betraying a flicker of surprise. "James," she replied coolly. "Long time no see." Before he could respond, a familiar voice cut through the air. "Lila?" Her breath caught in her throat as she turned to face him. Marcus stood there, impeccably dressed in a black tuxedo, his expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marcus's gaze shifted to the children standing beside her, and his eyes widened in shock. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lila straightened her posture, meeting his gaze head-on. "They're yours, Marcus. Your kids." The grand estate chosen for Marcus Walker's wedding was nothing short of spectacular. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like stars, casting shimmering light across the marble floors. An orchestra played softly in the background, their music blending seamlessly with the hum of conversation as guests mingled under the watchful eyes of photographers and reporters. This wasn't just a wedding, it was the event of the season, a spectacle designed to showcase wealth, power, and prestige. Guests sipped champagne from flutes that sparkled almost as brightly as the jewelry adorning their wrists and necks. Every detail had been meticulously planned, down to the floral arrangements dripping with orchids and roses. Yet amidst all the opulence, there was an air of anticipation, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. And then she walked in. Lila James entered the room with her head held high, her navy blue gown flowing gracefully behind her. Beside her, Jasmine clung to her hand, while Caleb and Noah trailed slightly behind, their wide eyes taking in the dazzling surroundings. The moment they stepped inside, whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Heads turned, eyebrows raised, and murmurs filled the space. "Is that Lila James?" someone whispered near the bar. "Didn't she used to date Marcus?" another voice chimed in. "She looks stunning, but who are those kids with her?" Lila ignored the stares, focusing instead on keeping her composure. She'd known this wouldn't be easy, but now that she was here, surrounded by strangers whispering behind manicured hands, it felt even harder than she'd imagined. Still, she reminded herself why she'd come, not for Marcus, not for herself, but for her children. As they moved further into the room, Lila spotted Marcus standing near the entrance to the garden where the ceremony would take place. He looked every bit the billionaire groom, tall, commanding, and impossibly handsome in his tailored tuxedo. But when his gaze landed on her, and then shifted to the three children beside her, his expression froze. For a split second, time seemed to stop. The orchestra faded into the background, the chatter of the guests dissolved, and all that remained was the sharp intake of breath from Marcus as he took in the sight before him. His eyes darted between Lila and the triplets, lingering on each child's face. And then it hit him, the unmistakable resemblance. Their dark hair, their piercing eyes, the curve of their smiles. They were his. His world tilted. Marcus's mind raced as he struggled to process what he was seeing. How could this be possible? Why hadn't Lila told him? Anger, confusion, and disbelief swirled inside him, threatening to overwhelm him. Before he could say anything, Amara appeared at his side, her elegant white gown trailing behind her. Her presence was radiant, her smile warm, but it faltered slightly when she noticed the tension etched across Marcus's face. "Marcus?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with concern. "What's wrong?" He tore his gaze away from Lila and the children long enough to glance at Amara. For a moment, he considered brushing off the question, pretending everything was fine. But one look at her expectant expression made him realize he couldn't. "Not this time. There's something I need to deal with," he said finally, his tone clipped. "Excuse me." Without waiting for her response, he strode toward Lila, his movements deliberate and purposeful. As he approached, Lila straightened her posture, steeling herself for the inevitable confrontation. "Lila," Marcus began, his voice low but laced with intensity. "What is this?" She met his gaze steadily, refusing to back down. "You already know the answer to that, Marcus." His jaw tightened as he glanced at the children again. "Why didn't you tell me?" "It wasn't my responsibility to chase after you," she replied evenly. "You made your priorities clear 5 years ago. I wasn't going to force fatherhood on someone who didn't want it." "That's not fair," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You never gave me a choice." "And whose fault is that?" Lila countered, her own voice gaining strength. "You chose your career over everything else, including me. Did you really think I'd drag 3 kids into a life where they'd always come second?" Marcus opened his mouth to argue but stopped himself, realizing how hollow his words would sound. Instead, he focused on the children, studying them more closely. Jasmine looked up at him shyly, while Caleb and Noah exchanged curious glances. "They're mine," he stated, more to himself than to Lila. "Yes," she confirmed, her tone softer now. "They're yours. And they deserve to know their father, if you're willing to step up." Amara watched the exchange from across the room, her heart sinking as she pieced together what was happening. She'd always known Marcus had a complicated past, but this was something else entirely. Pushing aside her initial shock, she approached them cautiously, her heels clicking against the marble floor. When she reached them, she cleared her throat gently. "Marcus," she said, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "Can we talk?" He turned to face her, guilt flashing across his features. "Amara, I think I deserve an explanation," she interrupted, her voice steady despite the turmoil brewing inside her. Lila stepped back slightly, giving them space. "I'll give you two a moment," she said quietly, ushering the children toward a nearby seating area. Once they were alone, Amara crossed her arms, her gaze piercing. "Who are those children, Marcus?" He hesitated, searching for the right words. Finally, he admitted, "They're mine. My kids, with Lila." Amara blinked, processing the revelation. "How long have you known?" "I didn't," he confessed, running a hand through his hair. "Not until today." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "This is unbelievable. Our wedding day, Marcus. Of all days." "I know," he said quickly, reaching for her hand. "And I'm sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen." "But it did," she snapped, pulling her hand away. "And now what? Are you just going to walk away from everything we've built because of some secret family you conveniently forgot to mention?" "It's not like that," he insisted, his voice tinged with desperation. "I don't even know where to begin untangling this mess." "Well, maybe you should start by figuring out what, and who, you really want," she said sharply. "Because right now, I don't think you know." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Marcus standing alone in the middle of the chaos. As the reality of the situation settled over him, Marcus found himself torn between two worlds. On one side was Amara, the woman he'd planned to spend the rest of his life with, representing stability, ambition, and the future he'd envisioned for himself. On the other side were Lila and the children, embodying a past he'd tried to leave behind, and a truth he could no longer ignore. Nearby, Lila sat with the triplets, watching the scene unfold with a mix of relief and apprehension. She'd done what she came here to do, introduce Marcus to his children. Now, it was up to him to decide what came next. But as Marcus glanced between Amara's retreating figure and the small family waiting patiently by the fountain, he realized one thing was certain. No matter what choices lay ahead, his life would never be the same again. The grand estate, once buzzing with excitement and celebration, now felt eerily still. All eyes were fixed on the unfolding drama near the fountain at the center of the room. Lila stood tall, her hands resting gently on Jasmine's shoulders as Caleb and Noah peeked out from behind her legs. Her expression was calm but resolute, a quiet strength radiating from her as she prepared to speak the words that would change everything. "Marcus," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "These are your children." She paused, glancing down at each child before continuing. "Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah. Your children." The names hung in the air like echoes, reverberating through the stunned silence of the room. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by hushed whispers. Cameras clicked discreetly, capturing every second of the unexpected spectacle. Marcus's breath caught in his throat as he stared at the three small faces looking back at him. They were so young, so innocent, and yet, there was no denying the resemblance. Their dark hair mirrored his own, their curious gazes held the same intensity he often saw reflected in the mirror. For the first time in years, Marcus felt truly unmoored, as if the ground beneath him had shifted without warning. Nearby, Amara stood frozen, her elegant gown suddenly feeling suffocating. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides as she turned sharply toward Marcus, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. "Marcus," she demanded, her tone sharp and cutting. "Tell me she's lying." Her words sliced through the tension like a knife, drawing all attention back to him. Marcus hesitated, torn between the woman he'd planned to marry and the truth standing right in front of him. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. Amara's eyes narrowed, searching his face for any sign of denial, or even regret. When none came, her composure cracked. "You knew about this?" she accused, her voice rising. "You knew you had children, and you didn't tell me?" "I didn't know." Marcus finally blurted out, his voice strained. "I swear, I didn't know until today." The confession did little to ease the storm brewing in Amara's chest. How could you not know? How could you abandon them, abandon her, and never look back? The room fell silent again, the weight of Amara's accusation settling over everyone present. Even the orchestra stopped playing, leaving only the faint hum of murmured conversations and the distant clink of glassware. Lila stepped forward slightly, her gaze unwavering as she addressed Amara directly. "He didn't abandon them intentionally," she said quietly, though her tone carried an edge of steel. "He didn't know because I chose not to tell him. It wasn't his fault, it was mine." Amara's head snapped toward Lila, her eyes blazing. "Don't try to protect him. If he cared enough, he would have stayed. He would have fought for you, for them." Lila flinched at the accusation, but she refused to back down. "Maybe. Or maybe he made it clear long before we got here that his priorities weren't with us. I wasn't going to force fatherhood on someone who wasn't ready for it." Marcus listened to the exchange, his heart pounding in his chest. Every word they spoke felt like a blow, forcing him to confront the choices he'd made, and the ones he hadn't. He looked at the triplets again, really looked at them this time. Jasmine's shy smile reminded him of Lila's warmth, Caleb's determined stance mirrored his own stubbornness, and Noah's mischievous grin brought back memories of late-night laughter and stolen moments. These were his children. His flesh and blood. And he'd missed 5 years of their lives. A wave of guilt crashed over him, threatening to pull him under. He thought about all the milestones he hadn't been there for, their first steps, their first words, their birthdays. He thought about the countless nights Lila must have spent alone, juggling work and parenthood while he chased success and forgot what truly mattered. Overwhelmed, Marcus sank onto a nearby bench, his head in his hands. "I can't believe I let this happen," he muttered, his voice thick with emotion. "I abandoned not just you, Lila, but them. My own kids." Lila watched as Marcus struggled to process the enormity of the situation. Part of her wanted to comfort him, to remind him that it wasn't too late to make things right. But another part, the part that had raised 3 children alone, knew that actions mattered more than words. "It's not too late to be their father," she said softly, kneeling beside him so their eyes met. "But you'll have to earn their trust, and mine. This isn't something you can fix overnight." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind racing. "I understand. And I'll do whatever it takes. Whatever you need." Before Lila could respond, Amara interjected, her voice cold and final. "Save it, Marcus. You've already made your choice." She turned on her heel and strode toward the exit, her gown trailing behind her like a ghost of the life she'd envisioned. The crowd parted to let her pass, their expressions ranging from sympathy to scandalized curiosity. As the doors slammed shut behind her, the reality of the situation hit Marcus full force. His wedding, the culmination of years spent building a perfect image, was over. In its place stood a fractured family, a lifetime of regrets, and the daunting task of rebuilding what he'd lost. With Amara gone, the room seemed to exhale collectively. Guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to leave or stay. Some slipped away quietly, while others lingered, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding drama. Lila rose to her feet, brushing off her dress as she turned to face Marcus. "This isn't the end," she said firmly. "It's a beginning, for all of us. But it has to start with honesty. No more running, no more hiding. Do you understand?" Marcus looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and determination. "I understand. And I promise, I won't run anymore." For the first time since arriving, Lila allowed herself a small, tentative smile. Good. Because these three deserve better than anything we've given them so far. As she ushered the triplets toward the door, Marcus followed closely behind, his heart heavy but hopeful. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't let fear or pride stand in the way of being the father his children deserved. The aftermath of Amara's departure left the room in a state of suspended disbelief. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, some whispering behind their hands while others discreetly made their way toward the exits. The grandeur of the estate, the chandeliers, the flowers, the meticulously planned details, now felt hollow, like decorations for a party that had never truly begun. Marcus stood frozen, his mind struggling to catch up with the whirlwind of emotions crashing over him. He wanted to explain, to justify, to somehow make sense of the chaos unfolding around him. But before he could gather his thoughts, Lila turned to face him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and resolve. "You don't get to defend yourself now," she said sharply, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not after 5 years of silence. You left, Marcus. I did this alone." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, each syllable heavy with the weight of truth. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came out. What could he say? She was right, he had left. Not intentionally, perhaps, but his actions, or lack thereof, had spoken louder than any apology ever could. Lila didn't wait for him to find his voice. Instead, she turned her attention back to the triplets, who were watching the exchange with wide, uncertain eyes. Jasmine clung to her mother's hand, while Caleb and Noah stood side by side, their expressions a mix of curiosity and defiance. "It's okay, guys," Lila reassured them softly, kneeling down to their level. "We'll figure this out together." But before she could say more, Caleb stepped forward, his small frame radiating an unexpected boldness. "No," he said firmly, his voice carrying a surprising authority for someone so young. "You don't just get to be our dad now." The room fell silent once again, all eyes turning to the boy standing toe-to-toe with Marcus Walker, a man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, yet suddenly seemed powerless in the face of a child's unfiltered honesty. Marcus stared at Caleb, his heart aching as he realized the depth of the mistrust he'd created. It wasn't just about missing birthdays or bedtime stories, it was about abandoning them entirely, leaving them to grow up without a father because he hadn't been there to claim them. "I know I messed up," Marcus admitted, his voice trembling with emotion. "I should have been here. I should have known. But I'm here now, and I want to try, to do better. To be better." Caleb crossed his arms, his skepticism unwavering. "It's not that easy." Lila placed a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder, silently urging him to step back. She understood his anger, his need to protect himself and his siblings from further disappointment. But she also knew that Marcus deserved a chance, not because of who he was, but because of who their children deserved. "Let's go home," she said softly, addressing the triplets. "We can talk about everything later." Jasmine nodded eagerly, clearly overwhelmed by the events of the day, while Noah tugged at Lila's dress, whispering, "Can we leave now?" Before Lila could guide them away, Marcus stepped closer, desperation etched across his features. "Please, Lila. Don't take them away, not yet. Let me at least introduce myself properly." Lila hesitated, torn between protecting her children and giving Marcus the opportunity he'd been denied. Finally, she relented, though her tone left no room for argument. "Fine," she said curtly. "But only if they're comfortable. And don't push them, they've been through enough already." Marcus nodded quickly, grateful for even this small concession. He knelt down to Caleb's level, meeting the boy's fierce gaze with genuine humility. "My name is Marcus," he began, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "And I'm your dad." Caleb frowned, unconvinced. "Why weren't you here before?" It was a simple question, but one that carried the weight of years of absence. Marcus swallowed hard, choosing his words carefully. I made a mistake, a big one. I thought I was doing what was best for everyone, but I see now that I was wrong. I hurt people I cared about, including your mom, and I missed out on getting to know all of you. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. His honesty seemed to soften Caleb slightly, though the boy remained guarded. So what happens now? That's up to you, Marcus replied earnestly. If you'll let me, I'd like to get to know you, all of you. But I won't force anything. You decide. For a moment, Caleb simply stared at him, weighing his words. Then, without another glance, he turned and walked back to Lila, signaling the end of the conversation. As Lila led the triplets toward the exit, Marcus watched them go, his chest tightening with a mix of hope and helplessness. He wanted to follow, to beg for forgiveness, but he knew that wouldn't solve anything. This wasn't about him, it was about earning their trust, piece by painstaking piece. Meanwhile, outside the estate, Amara stood beside her car, her hands gripping the steering wheel as tears streamed down her face. Humiliation burned in her chest, mingling with anger and betrayal. She'd poured years of her life into building a future with Marcus, only to discover that his past had been hiding in plain sight all along. A valet approached cautiously, offering to open the door for her, but she waved him off, climbing into the driver's seat herself. As she pulled away from the curb, the reality of the situation settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Her wedding, the dream she'd held onto for so long, was over. And so was her relationship with Marcus Walker. Back inside, the remnants of the celebration lingered awkwardly. Staff members began clearing tables, dismantling floral arrangements, and packing away unused favors. The media crew stationed near the entrance packed up their equipment, muttering about how this would dominate headlines for weeks. James Carter found Marcus standing alone in the garden, staring blankly at the fountain where everything had unraveled. "Sir," James began hesitantly, unsure of what to say. Marcus shook his head, cutting him off. "Don't, James. Just, don't." James nodded silently, stepping back to give his boss space. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the estate, Marcus remained rooted in place, replaying the day's events in his mind. He thought about Amara's fury, Lila's quiet strength, and the piercing clarity of Caleb's accusation. Most of all, he thought about the 3 children who now bore his last name but barely knew him. He realized then that rebuilding wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, missteps, misunderstandings, moments when doubt threatened to undo everything. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt a flicker of purpose beyond wealth and success. He owed it to them, to Lila, to Caleb, to Jasmine, and to Noah, to try. With a deep breath, he straightened his posture and headed toward the parking lot. His journey was far from over, but it had finally begun. The ballroom was eerily quiet now, its opulence stripped bare as staff members dismantled the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of Marcus Walker's life. Crystal chandeliers cast dim light over overturned chairs and half-empty tables, while discarded flower petals littered the marble floor like confetti from a celebration that never truly began. Marcus sat alone at the head table, his tuxedo jacket draped over the back of his chair, his tie loosened around his neck. He stared blankly at the centerpiece, a wilting bouquet of white roses, his mind replaying the events of the day on an endless loop. The whispers, the accusations, the raw honesty in Caleb's voice, all of it swirled together, leaving him feeling more exposed than he ever had before. For years, Marcus had prided himself on being untouchable, on building a fortress of success that shielded him from vulnerability. But today, that fortress had crumbled, revealing the cracks beneath the surface. And as he sat there, surrounded by the ruins of his carefully constructed world, he realized something terrifying: he had become the very thing he'd spent his entire life trying to escape. Memories flooded back unbidden, pulling him into a past he tried so hard to bury. He was 8 years old again, sitting on the front steps of his childhood home, clutching a baseball mitt his father had promised to teach him how to use. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard, but his father never came home. Instead, there was a phone call, a distant, detached voice explaining that some things just don't work out. Marcus remembered the ache in his chest, the way his small hands trembled as he gripped the mitt tighter, as if holding on could somehow bring his father back. He remembered vowing never to be like him, to never walk away from the people who mattered most. But somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of that promise. His obsession with success, his relentless pursuit of perfection, it had consumed him, blinding him to the people standing right in front of him. Lila had walked away because she saw the truth: he wasn't ready to be a partner, let alone a father. And now, 5 years later, he was staring down the barrel of the same abandonment he'd sworn to avoid. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to outrun his past, he'd run straight into it. Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes, though he refused to let them fall. He clenched his fists, digging his nails into his palms as he wrestled with the weight of his mistakes. For so long, he'd told himself that success would fill the void left by his father's absence, that money and power could shield him from the pain of rejection. But now, sitting in this empty ballroom, he understood the truth: no amount of wealth could replace the love he'd failed to give his own children. He thought about Jasmine's shy smile, Caleb's fierce protectiveness, Noah's mischievous grin. They were strangers to him, yet they carried pieces of him in their faces, their mannerisms, their very existence. And he'd missed it all: the laughter, the tears, the moments that made up a lifetime. A wave of resolve washed over him, cutting through the despair. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for the future. He wouldn't run from this, not from Lila, not from the triplets, not from the mess he'd created. Standing abruptly, Marcus grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. As he passed through the lobby, James Carter appeared, looking concerned but hesitant to interrupt. "Sir, do you need anything?" James asked cautiously. Marcus shook his head, his expression firm. "No, James. But I know what I need to do." Outside, the cool night air hit Marcus like a wake-up call, sharpening his focus. He climbed into his car and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the number he needed. Lila answered on the third ring, her tone guarded. "What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to talk," he said, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "To you, and to the kids. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because I owe it to them to try to be better." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, Marcus feared she would hang up. Then, finally, she spoke. "They're asleep," Lila said softly. "But, we can meet tomorrow. Just, don't make promises you can't keep." "I won't," Marcus replied earnestly. "This isn't about promises. It's about showing up, for real this time." As he ended the call, Marcus felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and trust wouldn't come overnight. But for the first time in years, he felt like he was moving in the right direction. He started the engine and drove off into the night, determined to reclaim the family he'd almost lost, and to prove to himself that he was more than the man his father had been. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Lila's brownstone apartment building, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he tried to steady his nerves. He'd spent hours the night before rehearsing what he would say, how he would act, but now, sitting outside her home, he realized no amount of preparation could fully prepare him for this moment. He stepped out of the car, smoothing the wrinkles from his casual button-down shirt and jeans, a deliberate choice meant to signal that he wasn't here as Marcus Walker, billionaire CEO, but simply as a man hoping to connect with his children. It felt strange, almost foreign, to dress so informally, but he knew appearances mattered less than intentions today. Lila greeted him at the door, her expression cautious but not unwelcoming. She crossed her arms over her sweater, studying him carefully before speaking. "They're in the living room," she said quietly, stepping aside to let him in. Listen, Marcus, this isn't about you. It's about them. If you're serious about being part of their lives, you need to earn their trust. And if you hurt them, her voice trailed off, but the warning in her eyes was clear. I understand, Marcus replied earnestly, meeting her gaze without hesitation. I won't mess this up. She nodded slightly, though her skepticism lingered. One chance. That's all I'm giving you. With that, she led him into the living room, where Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah were playing on the rug. Toys and books were scattered around them, evidence of a typical Saturday morning. When they noticed Marcus standing there, their movements slowed, and 3 pairs of curious eyes turned toward him. Hey, guys, Marcus began, kneeling down to their level. His voice was soft, tentative, as if testing unfamiliar ground. I'm Marcus. Your dad. The word felt strange on his tongue, but also right in a way he hadn't expected. Jasmine tilted her head, studying him with wide-eyed curiosity. You're really our dad? Yes, Marcus replied, offering her a small smile. I didn't know about you until recently, but I'm here now. I want to get to know you, all of you. Noah leaned forward slightly, intrigued despite himself. Do you like Legos? Marcus chuckled, relaxing a fraction. I used to love building things when I was your age. Maybe we can build something together sometime. Caleb, however, remained silent, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His skeptical glare never wavered, even as his siblings began warming up to Marcus's presence. You can't just show up and be our dad, Caleb finally said, his tone sharp and unyielding. You weren't here before. Why should we believe you'll stay now? Marcus flinched at the accusation, knowing it was deserved. He took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. You're right, he admitted, his voice steady but tinged with regret. I wasn't here before, and that's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I don't expect you to believe me, not yet. All I can do is prove it, day by day. If you'll let me. Caleb frowned, clearly unconvinced, but he didn't argue further. Instead, he glanced at Lila, silently seeking her guidance. Lila stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on Caleb's shoulder. It's okay to take your time, sweetheart. This is your decision. To break the tension, Marcus suggested they go to the park nearby. How about we spend some time outside? Fresh air might help us all feel more comfortable. After a brief pause, Lila nodded. Okay. But remember, this is their space. Let them lead. At the park, the triplets immediately gravitated toward the playground equipment, leaving Marcus to follow awkwardly behind. He watched as Jasmine climbed onto the swings, giggling as she kicked her legs higher and higher. Noah darted toward the sandbox, eagerly digging for buried treasures with a plastic shovel. Caleb lingered near the jungle gym, observing rather than participating. Marcus approached cautiously, unsure of how to insert himself without overstepping. Finally, he settled on sitting on a nearby bench, content to observe for now. After a few minutes, Jasmine wandered over, clutching a dandelion she'd picked from the grass. Do you like flowers? She asked shyly, holding it out to him. Marcus smiled, accepting the gift with genuine gratitude. I love them. Thank you, Jasmine. Her smile widened, and she scampered back to the swings, seemingly pleased with herself. Encouraged by the small victory, Marcus turned his attention to Noah, who was proudly displaying a sandcastle he'd built. That's impressive, Marcus said, crouching beside him. Did you make that all by yourself? Noah nodded enthusiastically. Wanna help me add towers? Absolutely, Marcus replied, rolling up his sleeves as he joined in. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself slowly easing into the rhythm of fatherhood, or at least attempting to. It wasn't perfect. Caleb still kept his distance, watching silently from afar, and Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking on eggshells. But there were moments, small, fleeting glimpses of connection, that gave him hope. When it was time to leave, Marcus knelt down in front of the triplets, his expression earnest. "Thank you for letting me spend time with you today," he said softly. "I know I have a lot to make up for, but I promise I'll keep trying. You deserve nothing less." Jasmine beamed at him, while Noah offered a shy wave. Caleb hesitated, then muttered a quiet, "We'll see." It wasn't much, but it was enough, for now. As they walked back toward the car, Lila glanced at Marcus, her expression softer than before. "You did okay," she admitted grudgingly. "But don't think this means you've earned their trust yet. That takes time." "I know," Marcus replied, nodding. "And I'm willing to wait as long as it takes." For the first time in years, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. In the weeks that followed, Marcus Walker underwent a transformation, not just in his schedule, but in his entire way of life. For years, he'd prided himself on being indispensable, the kind of man who could juggle billion-dollar deals and late-night meetings without breaking a sweat. But now, he realized that the very traits that had made him successful were the same ones that had cost him his family. Determined to change, Marcus began delegating responsibilities at work, and trusting key projects to his team so he could carve out time for his children. At first, it felt unnatural, almost like losing a limb, but as the days passed, he found himself looking forward to these moments more than anything else. He started small, learning their favorite books, TV shows, and snacks. He showed up at school events, sitting awkwardly in the back row during parent-teacher conferences and cheering loudly at soccer games. It wasn't always easy. There were times when Caleb shot him skeptical glances or Jasmine hesitated before holding his hand. But Marcus didn't give up. He knew trust wasn't built overnight, it was earned, piece by painstaking piece. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Noah surprised everyone by crawling onto Marcus's lap with a picture book. "Can you read this?" Noah asked shyly, handing him the worn copy of Goodnight Moon. Marcus blinked, momentarily stunned by the gesture. Then, smiling softly, he opened the book and began reading aloud, his deep voice filling the quiet room. As he turned the pages, Noah leaned against him, his earlier wariness melting away. Lila watched from the doorway, her heart swelling with cautious optimism. Noah, the quietest of the triplets, had always been the hardest to reach, but here he was, choosing Marcus without hesitation. While Noah warmed up quickly, Caleb remained a tougher nut to crack. The oldest triplet carried a protective streak that extended beyond himself, guarding his siblings, and their fragile hearts, from further disappointment. Every time Marcus tried to engage him, Caleb responded with polite indifference, keeping him at arm's length. But Marcus refused to let rejection deter him. He noticed Caleb's passion for science, the way his eyes lit up whenever he talked about experiments or inventions. So one afternoon, when Caleb mentioned struggling with a school project, a model solar system, Marcus saw an opportunity. "I used to love building things like that," Marcus said casually over dinner. "If you want, I can help." Caleb hesitated, clearly torn between pride and curiosity. Finally, he shrugged. "Okay. But don't mess it up." That weekend, they spread out materials across the dining table, styrofoam balls, paintbrushes, string, and glue. Marcus rolled up his sleeves, working alongside Caleb as they painted planets and assembled orbits. At first, Caleb kept his distance, giving terse instructions and avoiding eye contact. But as the hours ticked by, something shifted. Marcus didn't just follow orders, he offered suggestions, shared stories about his own childhood projects, and even laughed when a glob of blue paint ended up on his shirt. By the time they finished, the solar system hung proudly above the table, its planets perfectly aligned. Caleb stood back, studying their handiwork with a satisfied grin. "This is actually pretty cool," he admitted grudgingly. Marcus smiled, resisting the urge to pat himself on the back. "We make a good team." For the first time, Caleb didn't argue. The breakthrough with Caleb marked a turning point. Slowly but surely, the walls began to come down, not all at once, but enough for Marcus to feel like he was finally making progress. Jasmine, ever the sweetheart, started seeking him out for bedtime stories, curling up beside him as he read chapter after chapter of fairy tales and adventures. Even Caleb began letting his guard down, albeit in subtle ways. He stopped rolling his eyes every time Marcus showed up at school events, and occasionally, he'd ask for advice on homework or share snippets about his day. Noah, meanwhile, became Marcus's shadow, trailing after him with wide-eyed admiration. Whether it was helping in the kitchen or tinkering with gadgets in the garage, Noah seemed eager to include Marcus in everything he did. Lila noticed the changes too. She saw how hard Marcus was trying, how much effort he poured into every interaction with the kids. One evening, as they cleaned up after dinner, she couldn't help but comment. "You're doing better than I expected," she said, her tone softer than usual. Marcus paused, drying his hands on a dish towel. "I'm not doing it for your approval, Lila. I'm doing it because they deserve it." She studied him for a moment, searching his face for any trace of insincerity. When she found none, she nodded slightly. "They're lucky to have you trying. Just, don't stop." "I won't," Marcus promised, his voice firm. As the months passed, Marcus continued showing up, not just physically, but emotionally. He attended recitals, coached soccer practices, and even volunteered at the school science fair. Each milestone brought him closer to the children, chipping away at the barriers they'd erected around their hearts. One night, as they gathered around the fireplace to roast marshmallows, Jasmine turned to Marcus with a thoughtful expression. "Are you gonna be here forever?" she asked innocently, her big brown eyes searching his. Marcus hesitated, struck by the weight of her question. Then, meeting her gaze steadily, he replied, "Yes. I'm not going anywhere." Jasmine beamed, satisfied with his answer. Caleb exchanged a glance with Noah, who grinned mischievously. "Good," Caleb said finally, his tone lighter than usual. "Because we kinda need someone to teach us how to build rockets next time." The room erupted in laughter, and for the first time, Marcus felt like he truly belonged. As Marcus settled into his new role as a father, he couldn't shake the lingering shadow of his own past, the absence of his father, the man who had walked out on him when he was just a boy. It wasn't enough to simply show up for Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah. He needed to understand why his father had left, to confront the pain that had shaped so much of his life. One crisp autumn morning, Marcus climbed into his car and drove to a small town 2 hours outside the city, a place he hadn't visited in over 20 years. The address belonged to an old, weathered house tucked at the end of a quiet street. Its paint was peeling, its shutters hanging crookedly, but Marcus recognized it instantly. This was where his childhood memories, both good and bad, had taken root. He hesitated before knocking on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. When the door creaked open, a frail man stood there, his hair gray and thinning, his face lined with age. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the man's eyes widened in recognition. "Marcus," he said hoarsely, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Is that you?" "It's me," Marcus replied, his tone clipped but steady. His father stepped aside, gesturing for him to come in. The interior of the house was cluttered but lived in, filled with faded photographs and dusty knickknacks. They sat down in the living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," his father admitted, breaking the quiet. "And yet here I am," Marcus shot back, his voice sharp. "Why did you leave? Why did you abandon us?" His father sighed deeply, leaning forward in his chair. "I was young, Marcus. Stupid. I thought I could outrun my problems, start fresh somewhere else. But running only made things worse." "You don't get to call it running," Marcus snapped, his anger bubbling to the surface. "You left. You walked away from your family, from me. Do you have any idea what that did to me? How many nights I sat on those steps, waiting for you to come home. Tears welled up in the older man's eyes, and for the first time, Marcus saw vulnerability in the person he'd always viewed as a coward. I regret it every single day, his father confessed, his voice trembling. But regret doesn't fix anything. Trust me, I've spent years trying to make peace with my mistakes. Some wounds never heal. Marcus clenched his fists, struggling to process the raw honesty in his father's words. Part of him wanted to lash out, to demand more than apologies and excuses. But another part, a quieter, wiser part, understood that anger wouldn't change the past. Regret is useless without action, Marcus said finally, his voice firm but controlled. You can say you're sorry all you want, but unless you do something about it, it means nothing. His father nodded slowly, his expression heavy with guilt. You're right. And I know I can't undo what I've done. But maybe you can. The words hung in the air, piercing through Marcus's defenses. He realized then that this wasn't just about confronting his father, it was about breaking the cycle, ensuring that his own children would never feel the same abandonment he had endured. As Marcus drove back to the city, his mind raced with clarity. He thought about Jasmine's laughter, Caleb's guarded trust, and Noah's endless curiosity. These were the people who mattered most, not the boardroom accolades or the headlines touting his success. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, stepping out of the car to breathe in the cool mountain air. The view stretched endlessly before him, a reminder of how far he'd come, and how far he still had to go. I won't be like him, Marcus vowed aloud, his voice carrying into the wind. I won't let fear or pride stand in the way of being the father they deserve. When he returned home later that evening, the triplets greeted him with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Jasmine hugged him tightly, while Caleb offered a casual fist bump. Noah, ever the chatterbox, immediately launched into a story about his latest Lego creation. Lila watched from the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed but her expression softening as she observed the scene. How was your trip? She asked quietly once the kids had scattered to their rooms. It was necessary, Marcus replied, running a hand through his hair. I needed to face some things, to understand why my father left. But more importantly, I needed to remind myself why I can't make the same mistake. Lila studied him for a moment, noting the determination in his eyes. That takes courage, Marcus. Not everyone has the strength to look back and learn. I'm not doing it for courage, he said earnestly. I'm doing it for them, for Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah. They deserve better than I got. Better than we both got. That night, as Marcus tucked Noah into bed, the little boy looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes. Will you read me a story tomorrow? Noah asked sleepily. Of course, Marcus promised, brushing a strand of hair off the boy's forehead. And the day after that too. Noah smiled, closing his eyes contentedly. As Marcus turned off the light and closed the door behind him, he felt a sense of purpose settle over him. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was committed, to his children, to Lila, and to becoming the man he'd always hoped to be. For the first time in years, Marcus Walker wasn't running anymore. Marcus's life had transformed in ways he never imagined. For the first time, he felt like he was truly part of something, a family. The laughter of his children filled his home, their presence grounding him in a way that no business deal or boardroom victory ever could. But just as he began to settle into this new rhythm, an opportunity arose that tested everything he'd worked so hard to rebuild. It started with a phone call during breakfast. Marcus sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through emails while Jasmine chattered excitedly about her upcoming school play. His phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, a message from James Carter, his assistant. Sir, you need to see this, James said when Marcus answered. Walker Enterprises has been approached by a global conglomerate. They're offering a partnership that would expand our operations worldwide. It's unprecedented. Marcus froze, his coffee mug halfway to his lips. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just another deal, it was the kind of opportunity that could cement his legacy on an international scale. "I'll review the details," Marcus replied, his tone measured despite the adrenaline coursing through him. When he hung up, Caleb looked at him curiously. "What was that about?" "Work stuff," Marcus said vaguely, forcing a smile. "Nothing to worry about." But as the day wore on, the weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. Expanding globally would require extensive travel, months away from home, possibly even relocating temporarily. How could he justify stepping away from his children now, after promising them he'd be there? That evening, Marcus found himself pacing the living room, his mind racing. Lila sat on the couch, sketching in her notebook, though she occasionally glanced up at him with concern. "You seem distracted," she observed finally, setting her pencil aside. "Something wrong?" Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "I got an offer today. A huge one. It could take the company to the next level, global expansion, endless possibilities." Lila raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. "And what does that mean for you?" "For us?" "It means," Marcus trailed off, rubbing the back of his neck. "It means I'd have to leave. Travel constantly, maybe relocate for a while. It's not something I can do halfway." The room fell silent as Lila processed his words. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "You've made promises, Marcus. To the kids, and to yourself. What happens to those if you walk away again?" Her question hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't accusing him, she was reminding him of the stakes. This wasn't just about ambition or success, it was about proving that he was different from the man who had abandoned him, and from the man he used to be. "I don't know," Marcus admitted quietly. "But I can't ignore it either. This is the kind of opportunity that comes once in a lifetime." Lila stood, crossing the room to stand in front of him. "Then choose wisely. Because actions speak louder than words, Marcus. You've shown up for them every day since you came back into their lives. Don't throw that away now." The next morning, Marcus called a meeting with his executive team. As they gathered around the conference table, excitement buzzed in the air. Everyone assumed he'd jump at the chance to expand globally. It was the logical move, the smart business decision. But Marcus surprised them all. "Thank you for bringing this to me," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "It's an incredible opportunity, and I appreciate the work everyone put into securing it. But I'm turning it down." A stunned silence followed his announcement. James blinked, clearly taken aback. "Sir, are you sure? This could redefine the company's future." "I'm sure," Marcus replied firmly. "My priorities have changed. My family comes first, not just my career. I won't sacrifice them for anything, no matter how lucrative the deal might be." As the meeting adjourned, Marcus felt a mix of relief and apprehension. He knew the decision wouldn't come without consequences. Shareholders might question his judgment, competitors might seize the moment, but none of that mattered compared to the promise he'd made to his children. Later that afternoon, Lila watched from the doorway as Marcus helped Caleb and Noah build a model airplane in the garage. Their laughter echoed through the space, filling the house with warmth. "You turned it down," she said softly, leaning against the frame. Marcus looked up, meeting her gaze. "I did. They deserved better than a father who disappears halfway across the world." Lila studied him for a moment, her expression softening. "You've changed, Marcus. I think I believe you now." That night, as Marcus tucked the triplets into bed, Jasmine hugged him tightly, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I'm glad you didn't go anywhere," she whispered sleepily. Me too, Marcus replied, kissing the top of her head. I'm right where I'm supposed to be. Caleb smirked from his bed, pretending to focus on a comic book. Yeah, well, don't get too mushy on us. Marcus chuckled, ruffling his hair. No promises. As he turned off the lights and closed the door behind him, he felt a profound sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he was committed, to his children, to Lila, and to building a future rooted in love and trust. For the first time in years, Marcus Walker knew exactly who he was. And he liked what he saw. A year had passed since Marcus made the decision to turn down the global expansion offer, and his life had transformed in ways he never thought possible. The days of endless meetings and late-night work calls were replaced by soccer practices, science fairs, and bedtime stories. He wasn't just present, he was involved, fully and unapologetically, in every aspect of his children's lives. The bond between Marcus and the triplets had grown stronger with time. Jasmine no longer hesitated to hold his hand or ask for help with her homework. Noah treated him like a hero, eagerly sharing his latest inventions and experiments. Even Caleb, who had been the most resistant, now sought his advice on school projects and occasionally joined him for weekend hikes. Lila watched it all unfold with quiet pride. Their co-parenting arrangement had become seamless, built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. While romance lingered as an unspoken possibility, neither of them pushed for more. For now, their focus remained on the children, their happiness, their growth, their future. One Saturday morning, as they prepared breakfast together, Marcus glanced at Lila, who was flipping pancakes with practiced ease. You've done an amazing job with them, he said sincerely. They're incredible kids. They are, Lila agreed, smiling softly. But you've helped too. You've shown up when it mattered most. Marcus nodded, though his expression carried a hint of humility. I'm still learning. But I'll keep trying, for them, and for you. Before Lila could respond, Caleb burst into the kitchen, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Dad, he exclaimed, his tone urgent. Marcus froze, the word echoing in his ears. It was the first time Caleb had called him that, not Marcus, not even, hey, you. Just. Dad. What is it? Marcus asked, his voice thick with emotion. Caleb thrust the paper toward him. My history project. I need your opinion before I turn it in. For a moment, Marcus simply stared at his son, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. Then, clearing his throat, he took the paper and began reading, his hands trembling slightly. This is great, Caleb, he said finally, meeting the boy's gaze. You've really outdone yourself. Caleb grinned, clearly pleased with the praise. Thanks, Dad. Later that afternoon, as the family gathered in the backyard for a picnic, Marcus found himself reflecting on how far they'd come. The laughter of his children filled the air, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of birds. Jasmine sat cross-legged on the grass, sketching pictures of flowers, while Noah chased butterflies with a net. Caleb lounged nearby, flipping through a comic book but occasionally glancing up to join the conversation. You've changed, you know, Lila said quietly, handing Marcus a glass of lemonade. He raised an eyebrow, taking a sip. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? A good thing, she replied, her smile genuine. You've proven that you're willing to put them first. That means everything. Marcus looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. You've been patient, supportive, more than I deserved. Lila shrugged, brushing off the compliment. It's not about deserving. It's about doing what's right, for them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Marcus felt a profound sense of fulfillment. This was success, not the kind measured in dollars or headlines, but the kind rooted in love, trust, and connection. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Marcus stood on the porch, gazing at the stars. Lila joined him, leaning against the railing as a cool breeze swept through the night. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked, her voice soft. "All the time," Marcus admitted. "But I don't regret the choices I've made, not anymore. They've brought me here, to this moment, with them." Lila nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You've taught me something too, you know." "What's that?" "That success doesn't mean anything if you don't have people to share it with. Family, that's what matters most." Marcus smiled, reaching out to squeeze her hand briefly. "Then I guess we've both learned a lot this past year." As the night deepened, Marcus returned inside, checking on the triplets one last time before heading to bed. Jasmine slept soundly, clutching a stuffed animal. Noah sprawled across his sheets, his face peaceful in slumber. And Caleb, ever the protector, had left a flashlight on his nightstand, just in case. Standing in the doorway, Marcus felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought him to tears. These were his children, his family. And he would do whatever it took to ensure they never doubted his presence again. For the first time in years, Marcus Walker knew he was exactly where he belonged. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over the park where Lila and Marcus sat together on a weathered wooden bench. Around them, the triplets laughed and played, their joy infectious as they chased each other through the grass. Jasmine twirled in circles, her arms outstretched like she was dancing with the wind. Noah darted after a butterfly, his giggles ringing out like music. Caleb lingered nearby, tossing a football into the air and catching it with practiced ease. Marcus leaned back slightly, his elbows resting on the bench as he watched them. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the moment but for the journey that had brought him here. He glanced at Lila, who sat beside him, her knees tucked under her sweater as she sketched in her notebook. Her presence was calm, steady, a quiet strength that had guided him through some of his darkest moments. "You're amazing, you know that?" Marcus said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Lila looked up from her sketch, raising an eyebrow. "Amazing? For what?" "For everything," Marcus replied earnestly. "For raising these incredible kids on your own. For giving me a second chance when I didn't deserve one." Lila paused, studying him for a moment before setting her pencil down. "You earned it, Marcus. You didn't just show up, you stayed. That's what matters." Her words carried weight, a reminder of how far he'd come since that fateful day at the wedding. Back then, he'd been a man chasing success at any cost, blind to the people who mattered most. Now, sitting here surrounded by laughter and love, he finally understood what true fulfillment felt like. Marcus turned to face her fully, his expression soft but serious. "Thank you, Lila. For giving me this chance, for trusting me enough to let me be part of their lives." Lila met his gaze, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Don't thank me yet. You've still got a long way to go." "I know," Marcus admitted, chuckling lightly. "But I'm ready. Whatever it takes, I'll keep showing up, for them, and for you." Her smile widened slightly, though there was a teasing glint in her eye. "Good. Because if you mess this up," she trailed off, leaving the threat unspoken but clear. "Understood," Marcus said quickly, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "No messing it up." They shared a laugh, the tension between them dissolving into something lighter, warmer. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was understanding, respect, and maybe even the beginnings of something more. As the laughter faded, Marcus returned his attention to the children. Jasmine had joined Caleb now, attempting to throw the football despite its size dwarfing her small frame. Noah cheered wildly from the sidelines, shouting encouragement in his high-pitched voice. "They're incredible," Marcus murmured, his tone filled with awe. "Every single one of them." "They are," Lila agreed, her voice tinged with pride. "And so are you, Marcus. You've become the father they needed, all because you chose to be. He shook his head slightly, humbled by her words. I wouldn't have made it this far without you. You've been my anchor, Lila. My guide. She shrugged modestly, brushing off the compliment. I just pointed you in the right direction. The rest was all you. Marcus nodded, knowing she was right, but also knowing that none of this would have been possible without her patience and belief in him. As the evening drew to a close, the sky painted itself in hues of purple and orange, signaling the end of another perfect day. Marcus stood, stretching slightly before turning to Lila. We should get them home soon, he suggested, nodding toward the kids. Yeah, Lila agreed, closing her notebook and rising to her feet. They've got school tomorrow. Together, they called the triplets over, gathering backpacks and jackets before heading toward the car. As Marcus buckled Noah into his seat, he caught a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. Gone was the man who once valued power above all else. In his place stood someone new, someone grounded, humble, and whole. Climbing into the driver's seat, Marcus glanced at the rearview mirror again, watching as Jasmine, Caleb, and Noah chattered excitedly about their day. He smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. For the first time in years, Marcus Walker knew exactly what truly mattered, and he wasn't letting go. At its heart, this story is about the power of choice, the moments in life where we decide what truly matters. Marcus Walker began as a man chasing success, believing that wealth and status could fill the void left by his own childhood wounds. But it wasn't until he faced the consequences of his choices, until he stood on the brink of losing everything, that he realized the truth: success means nothing without connection. Without love. Without family. This story reminds us that no matter how far we've strayed, it's never too late to change. It's never too late to show up for the people who need us most. Marcus's journey teaches us that redemption isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing, it's about consistency, humility, and the willingness to put others first. And Lila? She shows us the strength it takes to forgive, to trust again after being hurt. Her courage to give Marcus a second chance wasn't just an act of grace, it was a testament to the belief that people can grow, that they can become better versions of themselves if given the opportunity. So what's your takeaway? What are the relationships in your life that need mending? Who are the people you've been putting off showing up for? Let this story inspire you to take that first step, to choose connection over distraction, presence over absence, love over regret. If this story resonated with you, don't miss out on more compelling narratives like this one. Subscribe to our channel and join a community of viewers who believe in the power of storytelling to inspire, challenge, and transform. Hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when our next video drops. You won't want to miss it. Because every story has a lesson, and every lesson has the potential to change your life.